this is the work of our lives, is figuring out what it looks like to have a faith in the real world and what that not only means for us and our relationship with God, but what that means in our relationship to the rest of the world.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Erin Hicks Moon is here with us today, and I am thrilled to have her. Erin has a new book coming out called I've Got Questions, the Spiritual Practice of Having It Out with God. And it delves right into the tension at the core of so many of our spiritual lives, the push and pull between our faith and our doubts, our certainty and our questions. You know, we often treat faith as this neat, tidy package. We're supposed to have it all figured out. No loose ends, no messy questions. But Erin makes the case that true faith, the kind that really matters, is forged in the crucible of our doubts and our struggles. It's about wrestling with God, having the courage to look under the hood of our beliefs and ask the hard questions. Because the truth is, the world is a complicated place. Our lives are messy and uncertain. And if our faith can't withstand that, if it can't hold up under the weight of our questions, then what is the point? Erin is going to take us on a journey today, exploring how we can cultivate a faith that is vibrant, authentic, and unafraid to grapple with the big stuff. This is sure to be a thought-provoking conversation. So join us as we learn to be okay with asking questions. Here's my conversation with Erin Moon. Erin, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so happy to be here, Joshua. Thank you for having me.
Well, good, because I've got questions.
Well, let's get them answered then.
That's right. You have a book called I've Got Questions that's coming out, and that's fantastic. So how do we figure out that your subtitle is The Spiritual Practice of Having It Out with God? I think that's scary for some people. Like, oh, can we really have it out with God?
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into some of that and to figure out, can we do it? Can we ask these questions? Can we wrestle with God, wrestle with our faith? And so I know that for you, what you do is you envision your faith as like this little plot of land, as you said in your book.
Mhm.
So you have this beautiful mustard gold carpet at First Baptist Church as a child, as you open your book, and put us there. What is that plot of land for your faith as a child? What was being cultivated early on?
Oh, I love that. You know, faith for me growing up was a really communal thing. I have a hard time separating like a personal faith in Jesus as a child from my family and my church. And that was good for me. I know a lot of people have very different experiences growing up in church. I've heard some of the worst you could possibly imagine from people. You know, I had a really incredible childhood pastor that I still keep in touch with today. Brother Jim introduced Jesus to me, and my parents introduced Jesus to me as a friend. Like, I liked Jesus a lot. He seemed cool. He was big into snacks, which I appreciated. There was always, some form of a snack around Jesus. And he also thought if you were mean to kids, you should get thrown in the ocean, which I personally thought more people should adhere to. Like, we should take that one literally. But I think what got planted for me, I was, my little plot of land had structures on it that were built from my family and my grandparents, my parents. They were so important in the cultivation of my faith. And as I grew older, more structures or more plant life or more vegetation started popping up. And those were maybe not as safe. And for me, for a kid, they were not as true. There was all of this, like extra biblical stuff that started, when you get to youth group age, it starts seeping in. I'm thinking of things, like purity culture and these types of things. I'm really lucky because my parents and my pastor, they were the same at church that they were at home and in the workplace. And so I really believed that the people who were telling me about Jesus, they meant what they said. Like, they actually believed it. And, that's why later on in life, when I encountered some of the ways that there was this cognitive dissonance between those two things, I was like, this is this is curious. What is this about? I need to unpack some of this. And I think that's why I really want to show people a better practice, because so much of why people turn away from faith, specifically right now, I think, is not really because of God. It's the way God is maybe presented to us, or the way others interpret who God says we need to be. There's work to do to overcome that, as opposed to just throwing faith out because it's really complicated and hard.
I agree. And I think it's a lot of how people see and interpret the faith and then present it to
Oh, yeah.
us. And there are, as you said, a lot of extra biblical things that just get put in there like, oh, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Where I really think that most people are being true and honest to what they believe or what they have heard or what they think is right.
Yeah.
They're presenting it at face value and
Yeah.
saying, I think this is the way it is. As you're walking through things that are a little extra biblical, what does it look like to then start to discern some of those things? How are you starting to wrestle with your faith? What did that look like?
Yeah. So I think, I'm a very slow processor and I'm not a very introspective person. So I think really the first time I encountered like a hold on just a second. What's this about? Was in college. I was on the university leadership team at my church, which is hilarious because I was, also, hungover half the time. But there were three girls on this team and like nine dudes. And our leader, I found out that he was not surreptitiously, but leading the guys in a study of Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. And I was like, "Well, I wanna know. I wanna have my theology be systematic. Like, what do I wanna join this." And he was like, "Oh, no, you need to find a lady to walk you through this." And I was like, "But why?" And he was like, "Well, this is really just for the guys. Like, I'm just doing this for the guys." And I was like, "But why?" And finally, we got to the point where it was like, I don't think you need to know any of this. This is not your lot in life to know, these things about theology. And I was like, "Wait, why are you weird about ladies? Nobody's ever been weird about ladies." Now, I grew up in a church that didn't have women pastors or anything like that, but it was never like, "You can't do this." It was just like, "We happen to not have any of these." And they're like, my mom was very passionate about her faith, and, she worked outside the home several times while we were growing up, and there was just never my parents had a very, I don't know that they would describe it as egalitarian, but they had a very, like, balanced marriage, and I was so confused. And then as I went to college and, I was a theater major, and so I ran face first into meeting, LGBTQ people for the first time, like, in real life, and that were out, and that were Christians, and who had a faith. And then, I was also being cast in shows where I, like, had to do things like smoke weed or something like this, but this is where, like, my relationships were. And it occurred to me, like, my leader on the university leadership team was like, You can't be in these shows, like, you can't be doing any of these things, like, you need to not be in this culture." And I was like, "Wait, I think I actually do. I think I'm learning so much about people and the way that you can express a faith and the kind of a Christian that, there's a million ways to be a Christian, and I just didn't realize that." And, I think I was learning that the faith that I had was really meaningless in a non-religious context, and I did not want to have that kind of faith. I wanted if I was gonna do this, let's make it be relevant for everything in my life, not just the part where I go to church.
Hey, if it's meaningless for a non-religious context, it's kind of meaningless.
You're absolutely right, because that's not real life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
So as you're interacting with other cultures and other people, and you're seeing things like, oh, these aren't people that are not human. I think we dehumanize people
Oh,
as like the other
100%. Yeah.
constantly. Like, my story is I go into the Middle East. I work with Muslim refugees in the Middle East for many years. They're the most kind, hospitable people
Yeah.
that I've ever met in my
Yeah.
life. And here are these poor refugees that are showing me more hospitality than
Than you've ever
99.9% of
experienced.
the Americans that I've had,
You're absolutely right, and I think, Brian Stevenson talks about proximity, and he talks about how when you can get proximate to someone and a different culture or a different life experience, you're going to change because now it's not a talking point. Now it's not something that's been politically weaponized. It's a person that you love and you care about, and I think that makes all the difference. I mean, that's exactly what you're just talking about. Like, you had a new perspective on what it means to be a Muslim and what that means about how you've been taught that these people are, and that's crucial for us.
For you, then what was then, wow, you're seeing, okay, these people are people. we They're people to be
Shocking.
loved. They're friends.
Yeah.
The way that things are happening, I'm being excluded in this men's group. I can't
Yeah.
actually study the things that I want to study with people. I can't do these different things. How do you start to discern what then is the meaningful thing in faith? If you realize, oh, now a lot of what I had was meaningless. How do you
Mhm.
start to discern for you what was good, what was bad, what did you want to keep? Hey friends, it's Joshua here, and I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about Shifting Culture Productions. If you've got a podcast, you're thinking about starting one, or you're dreaming up another creative venture, we're here to help bring your vision to life. From production and coaching to strategy and supports, we'll work alongside you to get your project off the ground and thriving. Let's partner together to create something impactful. To schedule a call and learn more about pricing, just email me at jjohnson@allnations.us. I'd love to hear about your ideas and see how we can make them happen. Let's create something amazing together. Reach out today.
This is not a process for me that has an ending or maybe even really a beginning.
Yeah.
I think I think often we think, okay, how can I get through this? How can I just figure this out as quickly as possible?
Hmm.
And while I understand wanting to do that 100% as a feelings repressed person, this is the work of our lives is figuring out what it looks like to have a faith in the real world and what that not only means for us and our relationship with God, but what that means in our relationship to the rest of the world. And so I think for me, it was really going back to the Gospels and it was really trying to figure out what are we talking about when we talk about the teachings of Jesus? What does it mean to take the Sermon on the Mount seriously? Actually, what does it mean to take everything Jesus says seriously? How does that change the faith that I currently have? Because that would be inconsistent if I kept those things, but they weren't really a part of what Jesus was saying. And so I think for me, and that's something that I am constantly picking through. Something will pop up and I'll be like, "Oh, well, this ABC." And it's like, "Wait a second. Is that true?" Like, let's look at that. Let's examine that. And I think that's really hard and it's really overwhelming. It's a very it feels overwhelming because we want there to be an end to it, and I don't know that there is. I don't know that we get to the last level of faith.
How do we keep going in it? I think a lot of people want an easy faith, right?
Oh,
They
yeah.
want
I
something
I would
where
love one.
I just I don't have to think about it and do it.
Yes.
Can say I am certain about
Oh.
this thing or that thing, and I don't even have to analyze it or dig deep, and everything is fine. As things start to then shake and
Mhm.
shift, and you go, "Oh, I'm not certain about these things. My
Mhm.
faith is a little shaky here. I have to do the investigating."
Mhm.
How do we enter into that?
I think for me, it looked a lot like grief, and it looked a lot like just, throwing my spiritual self on the bed and throwing a fit often. I'm a big fan of Mr. Rogers,
Yeah.
and
I
he
mean, who
says
isn't?
well, yeah, I think if you aren't, there's something we need to discuss.
Exactly.
Um, but he says that what's mentionable is manageable. And I've always really loved that. I applied it to my kids for a long time, but I think it works in a faith context as well. If we can talk about something, if we can move through something, because there are these expectations that I think we have about what it means to be a believer and what it means to have faith and why we would even have a relationship with Jesus. And there's this idea that if you can just, like, get through it or not really engage that grief muscle a little bit, you're going to just continue to push down on the sadness that you feel. So I'll give you an example. A church that I used to attend, our pastor was exposed for having a mistress for, like, 20 years on the side. And this
Just
was
a little thing, just for
just a
20
small
years.
thing, not a big deal at all. And this was a man that my husband grew up with. This was a man who, like, led my husband spiritually. He nurtured our relationship, as we started liking each other and then dating and then engaged and, onward to marriage, and he was a fraud. I mean, he was a huge fraud. It made everything he ever said or taught feel like a lie. And what do you do with that? Like, how do you reconcile that? I think you can either press into that enormously unmooring situation and never deal with it and just, okay, head down, thumbs up, let's keep going. But the next time something similar happens, and it will, let's be very clear, now you're dealing with two sets of grief, one that's been compounded on top of the other. There are things that we have to mourn, the loss of expectations, toxic teachings, and what they compelled us to do and to believe. And so part of that for me was absolutely grieving the person that I thought I was going to be, the life that I thought I was going to lead, the kind of relationship that I had with Jesus. That to me was so crucial. And let me be very clear, I do not like to feel my feelings. I wish that we could just, like, skip over this whole part. But for me, it was so important for me to really honor the loss of, what I had or what I thought I was going to have, or I will never, ever be able to move on. That was what it was for me.
I think a lot of us want to just skip that part, right?
Oh, 100%. And let's be clear,
And we try to skip it.
you can,
Yeah.
but you will continue to return to the exact same place over and over again because you're not actually dealing with the root cause. You know, Brené Brown, everyone's favorite psychology godmother, says the only way out is through. And, I talked a little bit about, like, a grief muscle, but I think the more you pay attention to what grieves you, the stronger your ability will be to handle it. So if you engage in repression, like I love to do, your grief muscles are going to atrophy because you're not using them. You start to stand up after you've been knocked down, but your body can't help you because you've neglected that, or whether that's a conditioned response or because someone told you you can't bring yourself into your faith, whatever it is, you know. And I think we wanna skip it, but what are we skipping it to? What is on the other side? Like, are we looking for a perfect faith? That doesn't exist. And, there is no beat the final boss, save the princess, now you get a gold star. It's, the life of faith is between those. It's in the part you wanna skip, unfortunately. And I think that's what's hard.
Well, thanks. Well, a life of playing Super Mario Brothers didn't prepare me for this. This is too bad.
Didn't it prepare all of us for so many things?
It was great. Now my son's playing it. I get to play more Super Mario
Oh,
Brothers. It's
a
amazing.
dream, a
I know.
dream.
It's so nice. It's so good. So it's not this video game where we're going from point A to point B where, we got this, we killed the big boss, we're ready. We got
No.
the princess. The rest of our life is happy. We actually have to walk through some of this grief. Walking through grief and faith needs a total reorientation of who we are as
Oh, yeah.
humans. I think part of why we want to skip it is that our American culture says that we are producers, that we are cogs in the machine, that
Come
what we
on.
do is who we are. that
Mhm.
we actually don't have this malleability in our life, that
Mhm.
we are just machines. And so it's a reorientation. So what does that look like to actually start to reframe or rethink who we are as humans in your process of grief and lament and this working this muscle to figure out, oh, I'm not just like push, push,
Mhm.
and I could
Yeah,
actually get through it. I actually need to sit with something, and I need to be more like clay than I am a machine.
absolutely. I think we get stuck in what Pete Enns calls the sin of certainty. It's very safe, and it makes us feel very secure when we can say, ABC is absolutely correct. I think we find a lot of comfort in that, and I do too. Oh my gosh, I would much rather be certain about something than have to, like, hold space for all the mystery. That's the worst. Someone who really helped me in this process was reading Henry Nouwen, who I believe really deeply, innately understood the connection between understanding who you are and understanding how God sees you. He talks about how the greatest trap in our life is not success, it's not popularity, it's not power, but it's rejection of who we are in Christ. It's that self-rejection of our truest selves. And he talks about, like, I am not who I am. I'm not what I do. I am not what I say. I am not, all of these things, but my truest identity is that of a beloved child of God and nothing else. Like, you don't even have to do anything. And I think, specifically in a westernized culture, and even more specifically in America, and even more specifically in America in this particular time, like, you are what you produce. You are the content that you make. Your kids are content, your family's, the whole thing. That's a conversation for much smarter people than me. There's that idea, maybe, and I'm sure you heard this before, but it's like and yes, this is scripture, so hear me out. But your heart is deceitful. Like, you cannot trust yourself. You can only, everything about you is a sinful, disgusting, dirty rag. And any thought that originates in you is wrong and gross, and you're awful, by the way. Of course, part of that is true, but also you are a beloved child of God. You have Holy Spirit inside you, and the Holy Spirit works within you, in your brain, in your heart, in your conscience. And I think we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves to make the right decisions for ourselves, so we outsource a lot of that, whether that's to our pastoral leadership or to books or to influencers, whatever. And doing that work of who we are in Christ and knowing that truth, I think that kind of helps us move forward and see ourselves for who we really are in the role of faith.
Hey everyone, it's Joshua here. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being part of the Shifting Culture community. If you're enjoying the conversations we're having, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but also keeps us inspired to bring you these impactful conversations. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, head on over to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, where you'll find extra insights, reflections, and more ways to engage with the topics that we explore here. Finally, if you believe in what we're doing and want to support the show, you can make a donation through the Support the Show link in the episode notes. Every contribution helps keep these important conversations alive. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of this journey to embody Jesus and impact the culture around us.
And that actually then enables us to be safe with
Yes,
God and asking questions and questioning
100%.
our faith. It was like, is this real? Is this not real?
Mhm.
It's not about am I right or wrong anymore. It's whether
'Cause you are gonna be right, and you are gonna be wrong about things. Like, that's just absolutely true.
it happens. So what is then having it out with God? Now that have sat with, we know we're a beloved child of God. we have this secure identity. Then now what does it look like? Like, oh man, this faith is not working. This God, I don't like this. Is this you? Like, why are you doing this? This is not right.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
how can we be safe? What is the role of questions as you're entering into this? How do we have it out with God in a way that it makes us feel like, okay, we actually have permission to do that? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I like to have permission to do
Oh,
things.
yeah.
So,
Well, I think we see permission all over scripture. I talk in the book about Jacob wrestling with God or the angel of the Lord. And Amy Jill Levine talks about this in, I think, Difficult Sayings of Jesus. But she talks about, and she has such a unique perspective because she's Jewish. She's not a Christian, but she's studied so much of Jesus's words and ministry. And she talks about how when Jacob and God wrestle, after they finish, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. And, we don't know the etymology exactly of what that means, but we believe that it means wrestling with God or wrestles with God or grapples with God. And then not only that, not only does Jacob get a name change, the people of God get a name change. Like this is our spiritual heritage. It's not out of pocket for us to ask questions. And I think that's also where the relationship actually happens with God. Like, if I want to get to know my kids about, on a topic or I want to know what they think, I do that by asking questions about what they believe and how they experience the world. If I want to make a new friend, I do that by having encounters that answer questions about what they value and who they are. That is where relationships happen, is in getting to know one another and asking questions of who you are. And I think if you and God are not engaged in conversation in some way, if you're just letting things happen and you're just either writing them off or kind of saying, "Oh, I really don't have time for this." Like there's no connection there. You're just existing. So I think if we can know and feel safe in the idea that, you know, God didn't strike Jacob with lightning because he wrestled with him. He actually blessed him for that. And I think that's really crucial.
so what does it look like then to find God's voice in that? Like, if we're having a
Yeah.
conversation, we're asking those questions. When we're in the wilderness, it feels like, I don't know if I can know what God is saying. I'm
Mhm.
just in this questioning mode. Is there a way to find God's voice while we're asking questions when we're in the wilderness, when we're a little disillusioned?
So I talk about this in the book, but I am a I have friends who hear God in the wind. I have friends who see God speaking to them with birds. I've met and known women who have like a direct telephone line to God, it feels like. I'm like, what is that like? How do you do that? I want that. But unfortunately, God speaks to me through what I call the one man band method, which is he is Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins attempting anything he can do to get my attention, whether that's through a podcast interview or through a friend saying something or through a daily reading or through one of my kids or even just a nudging in my spirit. I think we want such clarity from God. And I understand that desire for sure, but that's not where you get into the nitty-gritty with people when there's confusion or when you can just like ask those questions that are clarifying. And you may not get the answer you want. You may not get the answer that you think you need, but I think hearing God's voice is so different for every person. I mean, there's like an intimacy in it. I think it's all about paying attention, right? Paying attention to what's happening in your spirit, paying attention to Holy Spirit and saying, I have questions about this. Will you help me? Like, will you bring me information or guides or studies or things I can do to work this out? And I think those are all ways that God speaks, and we often get really hung up on the method. We also have a book where one of our prophets, the way God spoke to him was like, "You're gonna tell, Israel some stuff, but first I need you to, like, cook your food over human poop." So, I go, "Nothing." I don't really think anything is out of the question.
It could be anything. If it
It
is cooking food over some poop,
it really could.
that's great. Oh man, we were doing a training exercise last year, and we were out in a field with a bunch of cow pies,
Uh-huh.
and we had one woman who actually lived. She lived on the Tibetan plateau
Oh,
for a
wow.
while, and they used to actually bring a bunch of cow pies, and that's how they made their fires. So she made a bunch of cow pie
Wow.
fires while we're doing this training exercise.
What a gift. She knew exactly what to do. I love that.
She was enjoying it. She was like, "Hey, this reminds me of my childhood. This like is like the most exciting thing for me."
That's
And just
amazing.
yeah, man. It's hilarious. We're asking questions, we're disillusioned, we're actually starting to discern a little bit God's voice, like what is new, what is not new, what are we keeping, what are we discarding? What is faith then? For you, hey, if you just have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and it'll move. I still haven't seen a mountain move
No,
like that.
never, never,
I wish,
never
I mean,
happened.
man, growing up, that's all I tried to do.
Oh,
Like,
was that not I think that was every evangelical's kid's favorite thing to
exactly,
do, and be like, "God, I'm really thinking about it so hard right now, like, please let that not move." And it's just like, "No, I'm not moving. No, absolutely not."
exactly. And so then what is that for you now?
You know,
What's faith?
I think I read Jesus's tone in that really differently. I think at some point someone must have read the mustard seed story to me in a tone that really conveyed like Jesus was annoyed by me and he was deeply irritated with how stupid I am. There was that like, "Hey, you're an idiot. You're a ding dong and if you can just manage to scrape together the tiniest amount of faith, I will condescend to you. I guess I'll let you be a part of this." But also, even that mustard seed is supposed to move mountains. So, it sounds like you don't have that faith and you're just gonna be constantly frustrated. You're going to be perpetually anxious and everyone will also say, "Well, it sounds like you don't have like your faith isn't strong enough." Now, I think I view faith as taking God seriously and not that everything about God is like the most like I think Jesus liked to tell a good joke every once in a while, but I think that question of is God who God really says he is, and does that matter? Like, what does that mean for how I live my life? I had a strong faith in the trappings in what other people said about God, but that was just me taking myself seriously and, asking God, like, "Hey, this is good, right? Be my fairy godmother and we'll be fine." But I think taking God seriously means that I work through is God who God really says he is? And does that matter in my life? I ask those questions almost every day about something. I think, in the news or in my personal life, in study or in my job, whatever, is that true? And what does it mean? So that's to me, that's what faith looks like now, as opposed, I don't think Jesus is annoyed with me for asking questions anymore. Now, a lot of people would disagree with that, but I think that's what it's meaning to me now.
Well, I think that's great. How does that reframe the story of Jesus calming the storm as he goes into the boat with his disciples after feeding the 5,000?
Mhm,
There's a big miracle that happened. The disciples were with him. Then they goes in the boat. Big storm comes.
mhm,
The disciples are afraid, so they wake Jesus up and says, "Don't you
mhm.
care about us? We're going to drown."
Hey, hey,
Jesus,
hey, hey, pay attention, pay attention.
yeah. Jesus wakes up. He stands up. He says to the wind and the waves, "Be still," and they're quiet. And then he says to the disciples, "Why were you afraid? Do you not
Mhm.
have faith?"
Yeah. And haven't you always read that in a tone of, "Why are you afraid? Why don't you have faith?" When I think it's more like when I reacquainted myself with the Gospels, what I saw was not a heart of now let me be clear, sometimes Jesus is like, "Hey, get behind me, Satan." or sometimes he's like, you guys really do not understand this. But I don't think it's from a place of annoyance. I don't think it's from a place of you're you're so stupid. I can barely deal with you. I think it's I read that now as what like we have a relationship. Why would you not have faith in me? We like I thought we were getting somewhere. And I think some of that broke Jesus's heart, that even the disciples who walked with him daily, they were still having a hard time. And but I don't think that was you dummies. Like, my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I had to deal with you people. No, I don't believe that's the heart of Jesus at all. And so it's really changed the way I read Jesus's tone.
I think that's helpful for me. I mean, I probably have told that story so many times.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
perfect thing for people going through a storm and saying, Jesus can still that storm and be with you in the middle of it. And man, I think that helps reframe for me that little section of that story of faith of just
Yeah.
the disciples aren't stupid. They're just
No, and, like, they were genuinely terrified, and I just there's no evidence of the character of Jesus that he would go to his best friends who are genuinely scared. Probably some of them are crying, some of them are very upset, that he would be like, "Hey, idiots, like, what's wrong with you?" No, that's not in the character of Jesus at all. I just believe I think there was more of a tenderness there. But unfortunately, nobody wants to talk about Jesus's line delivery, which is, frustrating. And I have a meeting set up with their gospel writers when I get to heaven to talk about it.
I'm glad you have a meeting already set up. That's good. You're on the
Yeah,
docket.
exactly.
You got it there.
Exactly.
That's great. You talk about in your book that you said a few times. I was talking to my spiritual director.
Uh-huh.
What's the role of having somebody else in this, and being able to reflect back to you as you're wrestling with God, as you're asking questions? How do we do that with community or a spiritual director
Mhm.
or other people? And it's not just an individual in my closet episode every day, but we could do it communally.
Yeah. And I said I'm not a naturally introspective person. I need help to see patterns, see behaviors, to be curious, to wrap my head around things. Like, I need that. And I've had several spiritual directors. I don't have one now. I am in therapy right now, but you know, they a spiritual director for me has always, and a therapist, really, and friends, honestly, have helped to midwife me in, like, this is really hard, or this is really confusing, or something's wrong and I can't figure out what it is, or, you know, this situation is happening. What does it mean? How am I supposed to look at it? You need other people in different stages to help you along the way. Like, I need my kids who, as they are beginning to own their own faith and ask their own questions, like, I need them to ask those sharp, fresh questions to remind me of what it was like to be at that point of my faith journey. I need my Sunday school teacher, Rita. I need her experience of following Jesus her entire life to remind me that, like, just because I can't see how Sunday's gonna turn out, God is with me. She has decades of experience with that. And so, your perspective is not the final say. Yes, you experience something and that is true, but you could be, it's crucial to understand that the biases and the baggage that we carry, that colors our understanding of what is actually true sometimes. And it's very helpful to be in community with anyone for them to be like, "Hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but, like, nobody thinks that about you," or, "The way you're viewing this is off," or "Nobody grew up like, no one else grew up like that." Like, people don't keep that kind of a belief, or whatever it is. You need that. I mean, I think that's, we'll go back to Proverbs, but that's the iron sharpening the iron. And we need that. And unfortunately, some of this process is so deeply personal, and it can really isolate you. I think you have to be really intentional about finding that community at wherever you can.
What's up, everyone? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. It's a brand new podcast.
That's good news.
Funny news stories, serious topics, and spiritual growth.
Phenomenon is what it is.
I can promise this won't be quite like anything you've heard before in a Christian podcast. The Balance of Gray brings raw discussions that get to the root of some of the hardest questions. In every few episodes, we feature inspiring testimonies from those who have walked the walk. There's already a good lineup of episodes for you to dive into, so go check them out and tune in on Wednesdays for a great time and a bold twist on igniting your faith. You can find the Balance of Gray podcast on nearly every listening platform out there. Start listening now.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah, it's really hard for a lot of people. They start to question. People go, okay, you're not in anymore. And I think, I think one of the ways that hurts our faith is that we have decided that our faith is a bounded set, where there is a circle here. If you're in the circle, you're in. Everybody outside of the circle is out. They're the other. Instead of a centered set where Jesus is the center, and we all have an orientation towards Jesus, either towards him or away from him. And when that happens, then there is room for these things, and people can question, and we can still walk with people and be with people when they're questioning, because we actually have a centered set with that our orientation is towards Jesus, instead of this circle of saying the line is here, and if you are not
you're out.
Have all of the exact same doctrinal beliefs that we have, you are out, which is, I think, absurd, since
our
faith
but that's
is a
how
mystery.
it's been for forever. I mean, I'm
Yes.
listening to a podcast right now about the Salem witch trials, and just hearing about the way it got completely out of hand. And, people who were in the community and who were, a part of the church, like a fellowshipped part of the church, they were, if they even spoke up to say, hey, are we okay? Should we be murdering people based on a couple of teenage girls saying that they saw their specter in a corner of a house? Should we be murdering people because of that? That immediately put you in jail. I mean, you could not ask that. So that is not, it's not as dramatic for us now, I would hope, but especially here in the United States. But this has been happening for forever. Because again, we feel that when anyone threatens the safety of what we feel is already certain, that's very scary.
I think that's why I took my Blu-ray of Spectre, the James Bond film, and I just burned it. So,
You have to. You have to. Just get it out. Just don't
just
even
get
let
it
it.
out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't have that
No,
anymore.
you can't.
I have a quick question. Do you think that the way that you think about your kids' faith, that is shifted because of some of what you're going through, and the way that you talk about faith or disciple your kids and walk them through this has shifted because of your own faith journey?
Yeah, it was funny. I was with my mom and I think my middle daughter. This was a couple of years ago, and we were in the car. Maybe we were coming home from church or something. And my middle daughter asked something about Adam and Eve. And my mom immediately answered her, which is fine. Like I wasn't mad about that. And then I kind of followed up and I said, a lot of really smart people believe a lot of different things about this. And my mom came to me later and she was like, hey, I'm sorry. And I was like, no, it's fine. And I think it proves the point that a lot of different people think really differently about this. And that, to me, that's something that, I didn't have, not in a nefarious way, not even in a manipulative way, but it was, hey, the way that this particular church, these Southern Baptists, we actually believe that we have it perfect. So you don't really need to go anywhere else. You don't need to wonder about, like, there were, certain people that we listened to. There were certain people that we didn't listen to. And I think what it has really changed for me is showing my kids, hey, there's a lot of ways to be a Christian. There are a lot of different, like, we have a full spectrum of beliefs. That's why we have so many denominations and so many iterations of this, is because things were really important to people. And they felt like if they didn't hold on to this, they were going to lose everything. So, but that's just a feeling. That's just a way to feel certain about something. But there are so many scholars who, I mean, I think about the Zondervan Counterpoint series, which I love. And there, you've got two people or, sometimes three people, sometimes four that believe really different things about atonement or, women in leadership or whatever. And they both can bring a ton of scriptural evidence in their favor. Well, okay, what does that mean? Like, that means that I don't know which one of you is right. Is one of you right? Does it matter who's right? So I think it's asked me to inject a little more curiosity into what my kids believe. I want them to know that there are other interpretations and iterations of things.
That's so good. That's helpful. That's good. I always try to glean some wisdom as I'm raising my
Well,
son.
yeah, if you've got any for me, I would love it. Because that doesn't always work, frankly.
What would you say to people who are scared to enter some of this conversation, like saying that, okay, I could feel my faith shifting and it's shaky right now, but I really am scared to start to ask these questions because I don't know what's going to happen if I do it. What would you say to people who are scared?
That the things that you're scared of, they might happen. That's a very real possibility. It's very, like, I keep a Post-it note on my computer that says, it's from my friend, Pastor Trey Ferguson, and it says, get comfortable being called a heretic. Because I think so often, we do this series on the podcast that I help host, Faith Adjacent, called Heretic Hoedown. And it's so interesting to learn about why some of these people were considered heretics. And it's because they stepped outside at some point of what was considered orthodoxy. And sometimes the people who did that pushed us forward into a new understanding of God that we go, oh, well, yeah, that's the way we did believe. That's not right. That can't be right. So I don't think, like, anyone can be a heretic to anyone else. Anyone can, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be seen as wrong. You might possibly lose community. There are so many, in so many ways, this is a personal experience, and some people will not understand it willfully or otherwise. And I think something that we don't talk about a lot is that underneath that fear of, I don't want to work out my faith, what happens when I start to pull the thread? Is the whole sweater going to come undone? Is the fear that leaving it alone is not the right path either. It's just stasis. You're not doing anything. You're not deciding anything. I think it's really not a good idea to let anyone else decide your faith for you. Like, that's yours and Holy Spirit's, and you're building it together. And that can be really lonely. I think that loneliness is enough for some people to say, I don't want to do this. Like, it's not worth it to me. But there will come a time, I believe, I think the majority of people's lives, where they are forced to face those questions, where they are actually forced to work out their faith, because faith doesn't happen in the vacuum, right? If it's meaningless outside of, everything going great in your life, then what's the point of it?
That's really good. So people would go and pick up your book. I've got questions. What hope do you have for your readers?
I think so many people are reckoning with big questions in their faith, whether that's because of political climate or personal stuff. I know because I talk to so many people in DMs and email and offline, and they are reckoning with what they believe. And I really hope that they find a new spiritual practice that doesn't bypass the being a human, like being a human and trying to have faith in a supernatural being, because that is complicated and hard, because we live in a 3D world and there's something 4D, 5D, 6D happening out here that we're like, my brain can't even think about that. But like, I hope they find like a new practice that like honors their curiosity and their anger and their real feelings, but also at the same time helps you to engage with God in order to love and be loved as fully known as you can possibly be. I hope they know that, I hope they learn that the kingdom of God belongs just as much as it belongs to anyone else, to the doubters and the curious and the confused and the frustrated. I think so often we want to alienate people who have doubts. We want to say like, you're doing this wrong or this is it. No, this is just as much yours as it is anyone else's. I hope they feel empowered that their questions are not only valid, but they're an important part of building a faith.
I really hope that happens as they walk with this and with your book, which is a fantastic read. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I love it. Like it's really, really good to go on that journey with you.
Oh,
You're a
thanks.
great guide and you're a great writer. You're a lot of fun in your writing. And so it's an enjoyable read. So I
Well,
really
thank
want
you.
people to
That
go out
really means a lot to me. Thank you. I
and do
appreciate
it
that.
and read it. Yes. The foreword written by Sarah Bessey. Sarah Bessey's amazing. Her Field Notes for the Wilderness is my
Oh,
book of the year of 2024.
wonderful. It's
It's
wonderful.
so good.
She has been such a spiritual mother to me, whether she likes it or not. So I was
She
really,
has no choice in the
yeah,
matter.
she doesn't have a choice, unfortunately.
It's good. I have a couple quick questions for you,
Yeah.
Erin. If you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Oh God. I think I would say like, hey, you're gonna be wrong a lot. Let go of 98% of the things you think that you're certain about. Don't ignore your questions and don't take what someone who has been put into a position of leadership says as gospel. Like people can be and are often wrong. You will be the queen of that, frankly. So I think I would loosen my grip on what other people said, who other people said God is and what that means. And I would start that process earlier for myself.
That's good. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you recommend?
Oh God. Okay. My husband and I, our Venn diagrams on television do not overlap. Like it's a very thin razor, but we did just finish the newest season of What We Do in the Shadows, which is
All right. Yeah.
so funny and I love it. Matt Berry is hysterical. We're currently watching Interior Chinatown, which is great. I have no clue what's happening, but I'm into it. And then reading, oh gosh, I'm working through the Book of Belonging, which is a children's Bible from Rachel Eleanor and Mary Co. Clark. It is so good and so not just for children. In fact, maybe more so for adults. It is stunning. So I highly recommend Book of Belonging for sure. It's definite that Field Notes for the Wilderness is your book of the year. This was definitely my book of the year.
Amazing. Erin, how can people go out and get I've Got Questions, and where else would you like to point people to?
Yeah, you can get I've Got Questions anywhere you buy fine reading materials. If you're an indie books person, then please support your local indie. If you're not a like a buy a book person, request it at your library. That's always helpful. And then you can go to my website, erinhmoon.com/ I've Got Questions and see all of the indie bookstores and my publisher has a great deal on it. It's like 40% off with free shipping if you pre-order it. There's all places you could get it. And then I'm on the interwebs pretty much in every iteration. It's Erin H. Moon. Erin H. Moon on Instagram, erinhmoon.com, erinhmoon.substack.com. There's so many ways. So that's it.
That's great. Just search Erin H. Moon
You'll
and
find me.
you'll find Erin.
Yeah.
Erin, thank you for going on this journey with me. I loved this conversation. It was fantastic to just really unpack what it looks like to go on a journey of faith,
Mhm.
of where what we have been given may not actually last, but
Mhm.
there is the good things that God is faithful and he's
Yeah.
with us in the middle of our questions and our wrestlings and our doubts. And he is there the whole journey with us, and he's okay with it. He's okay with our doubts and our questions
Yeah. Well,
and
thank you for
the
having
mystery.
me, and thank you for I love this conversation. You're a great interviewer, so thank you for
Well, thank you.
letting me join you.
Of course. Anytime. You're always welcome.
Thank you.
So, Erin, thank you so much. It was fantastic. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.